the bourgeoisie likes to base its arguments on being impartial. You see the guy like, oh, it always happens. I don't even have emotions about it. I just don't know, you know? But he does know. He knows what his position is, but he's trying to seem neutral, right?
Mira que ya viene la revolución, para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, viva la revolución.
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
What I want to do is I want to share a clip from, there's this really shitty podcast. I was looking up Venezuela election results, and what I noticed is that in a lot of mainstream media, like they were really hyping it up earlier on. They were like, oh my God, like the dictator, this and that. And then after the election, because it was so obvious that the Chavistas are the popular force, the mainstream media, they kind of played it down. Same thing with Cuba. After November 15th, the stories about Cuba kind of died down because it was a complete flop. So I want to play this clip from a podcast from the North. It's a really crappy podcast from some fucking Vende Patria, Escuálidos. I think they're based in Miami, actually. One of them is based in Miami. The title is called Chavismo Wins Fake Elections in Venezuela. So I want to play this and get you guys' reaction.
We'll be talking about fake elections in Venezuela.
Yay.
There's a lot to unpack, but basically Edu and I are in a laughing out of sadness and despair mood because this is the cycle that we have seen over and over again since both of us and our generation has a conscious mind.
Yeah, we can't afford to be sad about these things. Like at this point, we just laugh ironically and trying to move on. But yeah, it's just the never-ending cycle of the government doing their own thing and the opposition just falling for every single trap possible.
It's always, I think the cycle is, stalemate, protest, negotiations end up in elections.
Nothing
the
happens.
Elections don't do anything. Nothing happens. Then they try to make protests happen again. But I don't know that the people are going to follow them much longer since nearly 60% of Venezuelans decided not to vote. And we'll talk in depth about that a little bit later. But let's start unpacking the fake elections. If you guys watch this show, you should by now be pretty in tune with how 21st century dictators stay in power by going through unfree and unjust elections. We just saw it in Nicaragua in one of the most extreme cases. So of course, the first thing that these regimes use is first world idiots to come into the country and say, look how amazing and free these elections are and in this socialist utopia. Thank you, Chavez. So, of course, here we're going to see DSA Portland, the whitest people you could find in America, are once again visiting a dictatorship to then come back to the U.S. and say, I was there. I was an election. What is it they call themselves?
Witness.
A witness.
Or a protector.
What?
I don't know. Whatever.
They monitor elections.
Yeah. This stuff is insane. The DSA just keeps getting worse and worse. And of course, we're not going to hear anything from the usual suspects, members of the DSA, other than silence. At best. At worst, we may be hearing from them congratulating Maduro as well. Like some other politicians around the world have done, including Vladimir Putin, Evo Morales, etc., etc., etc.
The authoritarian bloc. If you thought the Cold War was over, like,
oh boy,
sorry.
Oh boy, do I have news for you.
They did. They committed a little mistake, because the Cuban puppet dictator, Diaz-Canel, sent his congratulations for an overwhelming victory for Maduro and the Chavista regime, and now we're before the official results were out.
Not that it matters, not that we're surprised. Again, like it's something that we discussed last week when we were talking about the article from The Atlantic. Which again, it's I don't want to make the whole thing about this article, but in reality, it's pretty good. It's great.
That is what the show is about as well. I mean,
it's what the show is about, and referring to that article, and again, please read it if you haven't read it yet. It's the Maduro model of dictatorship, which is not about keeping the forms, which is not about proving to the international community one way or another that you're doing good, that you're democratic. They don't care about that. They couldn't give a flying shit about it. And even then, you still have the DSA guys going to Venezuela to make a propaganda move. Even then, you still have some members of the opposition that decided to be a part of this circus. I don't know. It's just Maduro and the Chavismo in general. They have, but we've been saying this is a cycle. This is not the first time that they've done it. They've been doing this over and over and over and over ever since before Maduro, like with Chavez, back when we still had some kind of actual democratic institutions left. And now that we don't have any, now that the country is like, you can consider Venezuela a failed state, we're still going back to this. Like, the opposition just keeps going back to this. And, I don't know, man. I don't know how long we can keep this going.
Váyanse al carajo 100 veces! I added that little last part at the end just to give some release, because these fucking idiots were just going on babbling about the quote-unquote the fake elections. By the way, their podcast is called From the North. So that just gives you a sense of where they're coming. They're literally coming from the perspective of Northern imperialists. Before I pass it over to you, comrades, to just give your analysis of that. One thing I found that was really interesting is that they make fun of the fact that there are international election observers and monitors, even though that's what they've been claiming for years that the elections in Venezuela don't have, right? For so many years, they're like, oh, there's no independent international observers. There's no people outside of the country analyzing this. Well, there's plenty of them. There's literally hundreds of them. And now they want to talk crap. So they're never going to be happy no matter what. The other thing that Comrade Flame of Liberation said, these rich expats love to use ID poll to push their anti-socialism. I found that really interesting because they themselves are white. They themselves are white Venezuelans who are acting like, are using this to try to seem like, oh, just because there's white people in solidarity with the Bolivarian Revolution, that it's somehow bad, which, it's complete craziness. And then also the fact that there's this constant myth about the democratic Venezuela before Chavismo, that if you really look into the history of Venezuela before 1999, the country was basically a giant plantation for the big oil companies. It was mainly white criollos who dominated the whole entire political landscape, and the majority of Afro-Indigenous peoples were completely marginalized. So just completely ahistorical, no historical context. But compañero Yhamir, your analysis and reaction to From the North.
Yeah, it was very historical. It was very funny. Just hearing these Esqualidos come out and try to like cancel out these elections, the legitimacy of these elections, and also as well as the participation of the opposition. Like they're kind of, for me, the way I took it was like they're trying to, through this like liberal, I guess, lens, or I don't know, try to like push for military intervention, like try to like sway people to be like, there's no point for the opposition to participate, that, we need to get rid of Chavismo, that, and I just feel like this is just like the opening for trying to promote military intervention. And yeah, I mean, it made me laugh about certain pictures that they posted up, like they found they goes to show that they do follow our media. And
Yeah.
I remember there was a poster there, there was a picture there of Vijay Prashad and Manolo de los Santos with Maduro, and I remember I was there for that delegation. That was for el Congreso Bicentenario de los Pueblos back in June. So it surprised me about how they're following us, and it goes to show how now they're gonna take certain people out of context. Or it was funny how they use whiteness too, and them being white Venezuelans themselves. But I mean, yeah, I mean overall, these are like basically the children of the rich kids, of the rich people, that they lost their wealth, they lost their political power in Venezuela. And they, are just trying to talk about this fantasy of what Venezuela was in the 80s and the 90s, which basically was a client state to the United States. And basically they had economic crisis in the 90s and massacres and disappearances, and nothing was being said. But yeah, that's just that's what I think about this video.
Yeah, most definitely. It's something that what they do is they completely focus in on 1999 to the present. They remove any historical anecdotes or facts about what Venezuela was like, that had one of the highest inequality rates by Gini coefficient in the world. Look at the statistics, the raw math. The inequality in Venezuela under neoliberalism was so bad that you had the wealthiest, filthy rich white criollo settlers who were in Venezuela, who dominated, monopolized the oil industry, and were basically just selling that oil to these huge multinational companies very cheaply. The majority of the people were impoverished, had no political and economic power in the country. Comrade Libre, your reaction?
I'm just disturbed that like these people get followings, right? That they have an audience to entertain around this. It's honestly just sickening because like if you're willing to like sell your own country out and you have like no commitment to your people and your land, it's just a really sad thing. And they used like apparently an article or whatever, but I didn't hear any mention of like actual of the results, right? Like what research are they doing? Do they not know that you can congratulate a leader because you update votes almost like hour by hour? They probably don't even know the electoral process that happens, or the lack thereof that happens here in Turtle Island, right? And I also think, and we were talking about this point when we were interviewing comrades in Venezuela, right? This, like, why do we not have international observers come observe the U.S. elections, right? Why do we not have international observers here? Because we know for a fact that there is fraud, right? That that the process that is taking place is not one that that even remotely resembles democracy, right? It gives the impression, it gives the facade, right, that we in this country have freedom and liberty and we can speak our mind, right? Well, then why do we have political prisoners and prisoners of war, right? Why, if you happen to be a communist, right, you can't say shit, but if you're a Proud Boy, then let me give you a platform, right? And so this idea that for some odd reason here in this country, right, in Turtle Island, that we are somehow absolved from corruption, right? That this is where people come to be free. No, this is where people come because their land's being exploited by the U.S. Let's be honest. Quality of life is way better in other countries. Most people only come here because they need jobs. Because during the Cold War, which they mentioned, but I'm sure they're not very aware of, right? You have attacks on our people, massacres happening. That's why people are coming to Turtle Island, right? And when they get here, like the illusion is lifted. The streets are not made of gold, right? And you have to work. You have to work to live, not live to work, right? And so the exploitation is just ridiculous. So it's just stupid, and they should do a lot better job of understanding like how these things work. In Nicaragua, homie won 75% of the vote, which is up from the last elections where I believe he had 69% of the vote. Why? Because he's actually doing things, right? He's como se dice en Nicaragua, el pueblo es presidente, right? Like the people are in power. Like there's this figurehead that is helping to ensure that what the peasants, what the people are asking for is being done, right? So like these leaders are doing that work, that needed work.
Most definitely, and it's interesting because even those shitty Esqualito podcasters, they're just repeating like the guy. He was like, "Oh, it's like that article in the Atlantic." I'm like, "You mean the mainstream media article that's funded by fucking Raytheon and all these mega corporations that make money from more?" Like the critical thinking is just insane to me because anyone who in any way cites like Telesur or Venezuela, anything that's in any way pro-socialist or at least has some favorable coverage of Venezuela, they're like, oh, they're brainwashed or propaganda. But when you literally are citing the Atlantic and all these mainstream media publications, you're like, oh no, they're respectable. They're respectable journalists. They are objective. They don't have anything that's biased about them. So it's just really interesting to see that their mental gymnastics that they use. Shout out to Steve Richter, said peace land bread. With the Palestine flag today. I'm the only odd person out. I don't have a kafia, but the comrades have a kafia. I need to get one. I'm gonna try to convince Ophelia to get me one. Shout out to Jay, said, and most DSA folks that went to Venezuela are brown working class. Flame of Liberation said, I just looked them up. Even though they are shilling for global capitalism and CIA, they can't even hardly reach 100 views. Yo, for real, because it's like, who the fuck wants war, right? Like that message is no longer even popular as it once was of like SOS Venezuela, we need to go in and bomb the crap out of the country and establish democracy. I think that spell is really beginning to dissipate. Jay also said there's also like 8% participation in Miami's elections just last month. The hypocrisy. That's very great point. We have to do at some point a whole episode about the mythology of Miami. It's something I've been thinking about because I feel like Miami has been hoisted up as this image of like free market, paradise, capitalism, tropical capitalism, and they don't even know how much poverty and oppression there is in Miami in itself. So that's like a whole nother thing that we'll have to do. And Bird Roldis said, I'm glad I haven't heard from Joanna Zionist Gusano Houseman in quite a while. Yeah, she's fucking annoying as fuck. And Comrade Khalil, your reaction to these idiots from the north talking about Venezuela?
So, I'm from Miami, right? In Miami, we have a lot of oppositions. There's a lot of workers here, right? To break that myth, Miami is truly a tale of two cities. You have a working class city, and you have a city of luxury. You have Black Miami, and then you have a city of Jim Crow rulers and Latin American exiles, self-exiled, right? Former rulers of Latin America. So with that being said, I think this video is hilarious. First and foremost, it is hilarious. And I don't find it that disturbing because this is like very common to interact with in my life, I would say. And I don't even interact with that many like Latinos like this. It just always ends up being like that. So I would say, like, I would like to point out a few things. I would say identity politics is inherently, like, in my opinion, a bourgeois ideology, right? Whether it's being used by the Latin American exile calling for intervention in their country, whether it's used by Republicans for patriotism, or it's used by liberals, progressives, and I would say counter-revolutionaries on the left in regards to Black, brown, indigeneity. It's reliant on like subjectivism, right? And I'm going to use the word subjectivism because my next point is Walter Rodney's 2 worldviews on the Russian Revolution. It's part of his anthology, which was released just recently, like 2, maybe 3 years ago by Verso. And in it, he says like, the bourgeois scholar, right? And these people are no scholars, right? But I would like to say, like, in the society of the spectacle, as Guy Debord says, right? In the society of spectacle, everybody becomes a movie star at least once, right? Even Even me, I'm standing next to Ramiro and his luscious hair. Look at him. This guy's definitely a movie star.
Thank you.
So it's my time. It's my time in this spectacle today. But you know, the bourgeoisie likes to base its arguments on being impartial. You see the guy like, oh, it's always happens. I don't even have emotions about it. I just don't know, you know. But he does know. He knows what his position is, but he's trying to seem neutral, right? That's what these murderers do. They seem neutral. They're like, yeah, we're gonna bomb Africa, but we feel bad about it. I remember I went to go listen to the Shock Doctrine. The guy, he wrote a book called The Shock Doctrine. He was like Obama's economic administrator. He's like, yo, Obama felt so bad that he couldn't help the workers keep their houses. You know, he made a tough decision, like bail out the banks or like help the houses or help people keep their houses. And, you know, he made a decision for the economy and it was tough, bro. He felt so bad that people lost their houses. Like, bro, you actually had the power to prevent that. You actually had the power to ensure that people who labored for their homes could keep their homes. But instead, you decided to bail out the banks, which has been a common trend in the last, I would say, 15 years of fucking global crises or economic crises to the U.S. economy. Just look at the beginning of COVID. The banks and Wall Street got bailed out first. Not only did they get bailed out first, they got bailed out more than once. Right? This is the only way that they're ensuring that there isn't a crash in economy. And to Comrade J points, which I'm like 90% sure is my cousin here in Miami, who does hella good work. Two things. The Internationalist Committee, the brother that was seen is Comrade Austin. And he's been pushing to ensure that the DSA commits to actual social strategy. Right? And he went to Venezuela to participate in these elections and witness it, right? And to ensure, right, the fact that Western media cannot lie to those who are trying to organize an imperial core, at least DSA's organization. We could critique DSA all we want, but this is what I know of it. And I would critique DSA as well. But also to provide aid to combating these corporate-owned media, right? Like, yo, the more we share information, the stronger we're able to create content for the future. And it's hard work because we don't have billions of dollars to support our financial campaigns. This is blood, sweat, and tears for the betterment of mankind, of humankind, of womankind, of non-gendered kind. And then my last point is here, this is a municipal election, right? So they're saying, oh, Comrade Maduro, this is a municipal election. They're not even talking about the fact that this is for mayors. This is for like city councils or however their structure is, because I won't pretend to know. But whatever it is, they're not even mentioning that. They're just mentioning the name Maduro as a little trigger, right? The lack of intention really shows the lack of investment in Venezuela, right? Here in Miami, right? We here at Troika have been discussing, and something we seem to agree on is like, look, maybe not everybody here in Miami who will stand against these sanctions and blockades needs to be socialists, but they do need to understand that sanctions and blockades are economic warfare, right? And if you did a little bit of studying, you would understand that. And I think it's very important to have the diaspora. I think something like the Venezuelan diaspora, especially because the Venezuelan diaspora, like the Nicaraguan diaspora, is not a committed enemy to the revolution, like the Cuban diaspora largely is, especially here in Miami. They are split. When we had our hands-off Venezuelan protests, when Guaido tried to do a coup d'etat like 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, maybe 3, COVID really fucks up my sense of time. I apologize. But when we're in Doral, City, Miami, Doral, you would not believe the support we got from the Venezuelan diaspora. Like, yes, do not intervene in Venezuela. Yes, do not intervene in Venezuela. And you would get some screams and you get some chants. And I'm talking about all kinds of Venezuelans. I'm talking about the white Venezuelans you would think were squalidos. I'm talking about brown Venezuelans who obviously look like they're of indigenous descent, or the Afro Venezuelans who obviously look like they're African descent. The results were mixed, because we have to remember that the revolution is a class theme. It is the majority against the minority. It is the workers and peasants of the world united against the monopoly capitalists, the oligarchs, and the exploiters of labor.
Wow, well said. That's really important information to know, because for me, I've stayed away from Miami for many years, because in my mind, I've been to Miami several times. I have family in Miami, and I've always had bad encounters. Like, I was reading a Fidel Castro book one time, and I was walking in Little Havana. I was like, I don't know what the fuck I was thinking, but people were like giving me some dirty ass looks, and just the interactions I had. So we get like that one image of Miami as like it's all just pure right-wing exile, gusano contras, which certainly exists. But I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think there are broad sectors of people who, whatever, maybe they're not socialists, maybe they're not even like against capitalism. But if you explain, like you said, Khalil, that sanctions are an act of economic warfare, that innocent people are dying, I think that's a good way to approach it. I think that's the correct way for leftists as well, to not be so dogmatic, or to be so like purist in terms of who we work with, to be like, yo, maybe they don't start off as socialists, but we could win them over to that eventually. So I think that really is the correct approach.